Chapter 461 Overt Plot of the Mysterious Marshal. Huo Yuan knew that it was almost time. If he went any further, he would hurt her. He didn't immediately remove his spiritual pressure. That wouldn't be good for Nanqiu. Instead, he slowly lowered the pressure and let her gradually adapt to it. As the pressure decreased, Nanqiu's spiritual state of mind also started to weaken. Finally, she collapsed to the ground after Huo Yuan removed all the pressure. Huo Yuan came to her side. He lifted his hand and rubbed the perspiration off his forehead. While he only let out at most 40% of his spiritual power, he was carefully controlling it throughout this 1 hour. He had to get close to Nanqiu's limit without hurting her, which was sort of a test of his control. If this was before he had formed his soul core, he wouldn't have been able to do it. He squatted down beside Nanqiu and placed his hand on her brow. After sensing for a brief moment, he was sure that her spiritual sea was undamaged. It was just that she had been overly drained. After this, he nodded satisfactorily. The method of using spiritual pressure to strengthen someone else's spiritual power was built on the premise that the person possessed immense spiritual power in the first place. Otherwise, the other party might be critically hurt if things went wrong. However, this was undoubtedly the best method, and it was the most effective on the first try. Huo Yuan estimated that Nanqiu's spiritual power would experience a significant increase after this experience. However, she was overly drained and wouldn't wake up anytime soon. Huo Yuan spontaneously opened his spectral demiplane and placed her inside. After unleashing some enchantments, he chased away some specters and protected her inside the demiplane. At the same time, he left behind a streak of his spirit to protect her inside the demiplane. The moment she woke up, he would be aware of it. After finishing all that, he stood up before continuing his journey. Without Nanqiu slowing him down, Huo Yuan was as quick as lightning as he flew in the air. This time, he didn't use any flying type soul tools. He relied on his soul power to fly. As he flew, Huo Yuan sensed that his soul power was slowly being drained. After forming his soul core, he hadn't had time to carefully test it yet. He had only briefly tested it in the Sea God's Pavilion. After the fusion, his soul power had actually jumped 2 ranks. He was now at rank 76. Such an increase left him close to rank 80. In just a year, he had managed to improve by leaps and bounds. However, Huo Yuan wasn't satisfied with his current cultivation. The war might carry on at any time. A 7-ring soul sage was considered pretty high ranked, but he wouldn't be of much help if he wanted to affect the situation at the highest tier. He needed greater strength. Due to the rank of his soul power was obviously being drained at a slower speed. Huo Yuan was more astonished with the recovery speed of his soul power. After more than 10% of his soul power had been drained, he didn't need to deliberately do anything. On his forehead, the black whirlpool that belonged to a different dimension naturally opened. There was boundless darkness inside this whirlpool. A strong suction force instantaneously appeared and sucked all the origin energy in the air to replenish Huo Yuan's body. He recovered as quickly as he was drained. It was as if he wasn't affected at all. No wonder it was only a tidal Douluo that could possess a soul core. Given this recovery speed, he wasn't afraid of being drained in the process of flying. Furthermore, Huo Yuan was stunned to discover that his soul core didn't just replenish his soul power, it also replenished his spiritual power. To help Nanqiu earlier, his spiritual sea was revolving in a weird trajectory, but his spiritual power was now recovering too. Simply put, this soul core was like another Huo Yuan in a different dimension. In this world, Huo Yuan might be flying. However, he was resting and cultivating in the other dimension. This feeling wasn't just new, it was fantastic too. Huo Yuan understood that his cultivation speed had doubled at the very least after obtaining this soul core. Within a year or two, he could become a soul Douluo. Right now, he was just 20 years old. As he flew and sensed the changes in his soul core, Huo Yuan's flying speed kept on increasing. He was like a beam of flowing light in the air. More magically, this beam of flowing light was slowly dimming as it flew. It was as if it were combining with heaven and earth. If Elder Mu could be by Huo Yuan's side right now, he would be shocked. He would also tell Huo Yuan that this was the unity of heaven and man. Even transcendent Douluo might not reach such a realm. After reaching such a realm, not only would one's life energy decrease at a slower speed, but his affinity with the origin energy of heaven and earth would also increase. During the process of cultivation and recovery, such a soul master would do better than other soul masters of the same cultivation. In addition, such a soul master would also be better at concealing himself. Huo Yuan was delayed because he was helping Nanqiu earlier, but he soon caught up with his astonishing speed. In the evening, he could already see the outline of Dragon City. Dragon City was considered a huge city in the Heavenly Soul Empire, located in its northeast region. Its temperature was comparatively lower than the other regions. Moving north from Dragon City, Huo Yuan could reach the extreme north in less than 4 hours. He could reach the core of the extreme north in at most 8 hours. This clearly showed how low the temperature was in Dragon City. Huo Yuan could only see ice and snow all around. In fact, he clearly knew why the Sun Moon Empire chose to occupy more than 2/3 of the territory of the Heavenly Soul Empire. They wanted to continue expanding their territory starting from the north. One reason was that it was very difficult for ordinary soldiers to resist the cold in the north. This was even more advantageous for their soul engineer legions. Even the Douluo Empire wasn't able to provide stronger support. Another reason was naturally because of Shrek Academy. If the Sun Moon Empire attacked the south first, they were very likely to face the combined forces of the Dalu Empire, Heavenly Soul Empire, Douluo Empire, and Shrek Academy. Just like Huo Yuan's second plan, such a situation would lead to a final showdown between the Sun Moon Empire and the rest of the other empires and Shrek Academy. Without the Dalu Empire's attack on the Sun Moon Empire's territories, the Sun Moon Empire might perhaps still choose a final showdown. With the Holy Ghost Church to support them, a few soul engineer legions and 2 ultimate Douluo, they were confident of winning. However, if the Sun Moon Empire's territories were attacked, they would be greatly threatened and would have no choice but to send troops to protect their own territories. Under such a condition, the situation at the front lines was bound to be less intense. Invading from the north would at least help them avoid the Dalu Empire and Shrek Academy. The remaining troops of the Doling and Heavenly Soul Empires would at most delay them, but not stop them. Evidently, attacking from the north instead of the south was more advantageous. At the same time, the Sun Moon Empire needed some buffer time. Although the Heavenly Soul Empire wasn't as huge as the Dalu Empire, it was still much bigger than the Doling Empire. Compared to the Sun Moon Empire, it was still 2/3 as large. After occupying the Heavenly Soul Empire, the Sun Moon Empire still needed time to pacify the citizens and strengthen their rule. This was why the Sun Moon Empire had toned down over the past month or so. An invasion couldn't be pulled off so easily. This was because it wasn't just an invasion, it was an annexation. The Sun Moon Empire wanted to expand its territory. It was Huo Yuan's first time here in Dragon City. Now that the first city in the north of the Heavenly Soul Empire was already occupied, how could one not feel hopeless? The Heavenly Dragon and Earth Dragon sects were the 2 most representative sects of Dragon City. However, they were still lacking compared to the Sun Moon Empire. The Earth Dragon sect saw it coming and had already moved more than half of their resources and disciples to Shrek City under Nan Shushui's charge. They only had some resources left over, but they weren't greatly affected. The situation that the Heavenly Dragon sect was in right now was unknown. Huo Yuan could still clearly remember how strong the captain of the Earth Dragon sect's team, Long, was during the Elite Continental Advanced Soul Master Academy Soul Dueling Tournament. His pure blue lightning current dragon was extraordinary. Nan Shushui had also mentioned that the Heavenly Dragon sect was stronger than the Earth Dragon sect, whose sect leader was a titled Douluo. Even though it wasn't as strong as the blue lightning current dragon sect in the past, it was still an elite sect. As he thought, Huo Yuan was already getting closer and closer to Dragon City. He unleashed his spiritual power in the direction of Dragon City. Just as he had expected, there were already aerial surveillance soul tools over Dragon City. However, there were few aerial surveillance soul tools here compared to the Mingdo mountain range. After all, manufacturing aerial surveillance soul tools wasn't cheap. Unless they were used at particularly important places, there wouldn't be a congregation of them. At the same time, Huo Yuan saw that there were no troops stationed outside the city. There were only some guards on the city wall. It seemed like the Sun Moon Empire's defense of Dragon City wasn't very strong. Huo Yuan found a small tree that could conceal him as he descended when he was around 8 kilometers from Dragon City. He revealed himself before walking towards the city. Nanqiu was still in a deep sleep. Huo Yuan predicted that she would only awaken the next morning. This period of time was particularly important to her. One couldn't increase their spiritual power under normal conditions. This was why he decided to enter the city and find a place to stay first before going to the Earth Dragon Sect after Nankikai was awake. He would need some time to walk 8 kilometers. However, he wasn't in a rush and walked slowly. There wasn't much security outside the city, and he was only briefly checked before he was allowed to enter. After entering Dragon City, Huo felt much less cold air blowing against him. With the city wall as a barrier, the temperature inside the city was naturally higher than outside the city. Everything inside the city seemed to be very ordinary. There weren't any signs of suffering or misery. Although the streets weren't completely empty, they weren't bustling with life either. In a city as cold as this, the population was bound to be much less than a city in the south. As Huo walked forward, he observed his surroundings and sensed the changes. There was a simple soul formation at the top of the city wall. However, there weren't many soul engineers stationed there, and they were only accompanied by a few ordinary soldiers. Given such a defense, the Heavenly Soul Empire could possibly overcome it if they could divide their troops and attack the city with 1 or 2 regular legions. Shrek Academy didn't have any information about this city either. Naturally, Huo didn't know anything. In a city, there wasn't a place more suitable than an inn to find out information. Huo decided to find an inn and gather information about the situation in Dragon City before making any plans. It was very easy to find an inn in such a cold city. Drinking could warm one's body, and this was why many northerners considered it their hobby. Even some ladies shared the same hobby too. Huo soon found an inn and entered. The signboard of this inn wasn't very big. However, Huo immediately sensed a bustling atmosphere the moment he entered. A warm feeling swept over him the moment he entered. He felt engulfed by a heat wave, and the coldness he felt in his body immediately disappeared. The size of the inn wasn't very big, and it was much hotter inside this inn. Some people were even sleeveless as they consumed alcohol. There were 4 or 5 tables as well as a bar. There were 20 to 30 people in the inn, which contributed to the rowdy atmosphere. However, the atmosphere also felt very friendly. Huo noticed that there were a few scantily clad ladies behind every table in the bar. However, these ladies weren't young. They looked to be in their 30s. Although they were scantily clad, they weren't very physically attractive. They were all dressed in the same way. Evidently, they belonged to this inn. They were there to drink with the customers, but they didn't provide any further services. Even though the customers were also drinking and joking with them, they were seated pretty far away. It seemed like this was a culture of inns in Dragon City. Ladies were only there to provide an atmosphere for drinking. Welcome, sir. A scantily clad lady who revealed her shoulders and cleavage walked over and greeted Huo, who had just entered. She had a strong northern accent. Her voice was very smooth, but it was slightly nasal. Although her yellow dress was very revealing, it also exuded the elegant style of the Heavenly Soul Empire. It was just that the dress was made of slightly inferior quality. Hi. Huo nodded slightly to acknowledge her. Are there still seats? The lady in yellow said. There are only seats at the bar. Will that do? Yes. Huo nodded again. The lady brought him to a corner of the bar before sitting down. Huo was dressed rather lightly. After all, he came directly from Shrek Academy. Naturally, he didn't need to take off a coat. However, all the customers in the inn were already drunk and didn't notice this at all. The lady brought a glass of warm water for Huo before asking, Sir, you must be a foreigner. Huo nodded. Yes. Dragon City is really cold. The lady laughed. You're right. Seeing the way you're dressed, you must be feeling very cold. You'll be fine after having some alcohol. What do you want? Huo said. Give me something local. All right, wait a minute then. Not long afterward, a glass of amber alcohol was brought in front of Huo. It had a strong alcoholic fragrance. Huo lifted his cup and sniffed the alcohol. Suddenly, a strong alcoholic scent swept his nose. Evidently, the alcohol was very strong. As he sniffed the alcohol, he couldn't help but recall how there was too much origin energy of ultimate ice in his body during the tournament in Radiant City, and how he had to rely on distillate to neutralize it. Time had passed so quickly. Wang Donga was no longer with him, and he was now in this northern city. After tasting a sip of the alcohol, a malty, acrid taste filled his throat. It warmed his body as it went all the way into his belly. That feeling was indeed refreshing. Huo didn't use his soul power to neutralize the strength of the alcohol. As he sensed the burning stimulation, his face also turned a bit red. Even though he wasn't the most handsome person, he was still very charming because of his great spiritual power. The lady's eyes brightened when she saw his flush. Sir, where are you from? Huo said. I'm from the south, and I'm here to visit a friend. The lady smiled and replied, You must be careful then. It's wartime now. Don't go to war-prone places where there's a lot of fighting. Huo wasn't moved as he said. I heard that Dragon City has already. The lady didn't hide anything from him and responded to his question. Yes, Dragon City has already been occupied by the Sun Moon Empire. We were initially very worried, but it seems like things aren't that bad. Oh. Huo was a little astonished as he looked at her. He asked, How's the war situation? She replied, Ordinary citizens like us wouldn't know anything. At least the Sun Moon Empire hasn't done anything to ordinary citizens like us after occupying Dragon City. Instead, they've sent out announcements that they won't plunder from us or kill anyone. They want us to maintain order and not leave our houses easily. Just like that. Huo was a little astonished. The Sun Moon Empire had greatly alleviated the suffering that ordinary citizens generally experienced in such cases by not touching them. If this was the case, it was a blessing amongst all the suffering. The lady said, Yes, they have occupied Dragon City for many days, and only left behind a few soldiers to maintain order. After that, businessmen started to enter the city. The soldiers retreated from the city 2 days after arriving. You should have seen how there isn't much damage to the city at all. I only heard that a few Soulmaster sects were forced to temporarily leave Dragon City by the Sun Moon Empire's troops. However, I'm not sure where they went. Huo furrowed his brow and started to ponder. From the start when Shu Tianran started the war and held many elite talents from the Soul Dueling tournament captive, he thought that lives were bound to be lost in this war. Furthermore, the Holy Ghost Church aided the Sun Moon Empire. Given such a situation, how is it possible that they spared the citizens? This was something that Huo hadn't expected. Before Huo even asked anything else, the lady also got herself a glass of malt alcohol from behind the bar and said, Those businessmen were also very weird. After entering the city, they didn't trade. Instead, they were giving out stuff. I heard that they gave many of the nobility in the city with items. I heard they were related to soul tools. Their empire occupied our city, but they're giving us stuff. I don't get what's going on. Huo was also confused when he heard her words. Why has something like this happened? What is the Sun Moon Empire planning to do? Huo only got this information. He didn't obtain anything useful after speaking to other patrons. After inquiring about the mayor's house in the city, he left the inn upon finishing his alcohol. Right now, the sky had already turned dark, and the flow of people on the streets had evidently decreased. The temperature had also dropped significantly. To prevent himself from being too conspicuous, Huo retrieved a coat from his storage type soul tool and wore it. He slowly walked the streets. He had originally intended to find a place to stay, and would only go to the Earth Dragon Sect after Nankikai woke up. However, he had some new ideas now. He was curious. The Sun Moon Empire had not plundered the citizens nor touched them in any way. They even allowed businessmen to enter the city to give them stuff. What were the Empire's intentions here? He went to the mayor's residence to take a look. At least there were people from the Sun Moon Empire there. Perhaps he could obtain some information. As he thought until here, Huo turned into a dark alley and slowly disappeared into the dark under the concealment of his invitation. The mayor's residence was located in the city center just like in most other cities. The mayor's residence looked pretty big and was visible from afar. There were 2 soldiers standing at the entrance. They wore thick winterwear. Huo jumped up and silently entered the residence. He moved like a falling leaf and didn't alarm anyone. The residence was very quiet. It was only after a while that a patrol of troops could be seen passing by. Huo snuck in and quickly came to the core structure of the residence. He drifted up towards a second story room that was lit. At the same time, he unleashed his spiritual power, engulfing the entire residence. residence. He didn't believe there were any spiritual detectors here. Very soon, he quickly grasped the situation in the residence. There were about 150 troopers inside this residence. Of them, 20 were soul engineers. Their cultivations were slightly weak. There were only 2 or 3 ring soul engineers. In the central room of the residence, there was a 6-ring soul emperor. Huo Yuao could only tell if he was a soul engineer by seeing him directly. He's only a soul emperor, but he's taking charge of the entire city. The Sun Moon Empire is really throwing caution to the wind. As he thought, Huo Yuao drifted up and charged towards the room where the soul emperor was. Very soon, he was outside the door. Given the number of people that were in this residence, he was absolutely confident of defeating all of them by himself. However, he didn't want to alarm anyone. He remained quiet outside the window. His spiritual power was focused inside the room, and he silently listened and observed. There was a 50-year-old soul emperor reading some documents in the room and nodding occasionally. To only be a soul emperor at such an age meant that he had no future. Furthermore, Huo Yuao also sensed the presence of soul tools in the room. Undoubtedly, he had to be a class 6 soul engineer. Someone came. Huo Yuao felt something, and sensed a few people outside the residence. From their dress, it seemed like they were all businessmen instead of military personnel. These people quickly entered the residence after sending word of their arrival before rushing into the room where this soul emperor was. Sir, people from the Sun Moon Chamber of Commerce are here. A soldier respectfully reported from outside the room. All right. Let them in, the soul emperor said calmly. The few businessmen were led into the room under the guidance of the soldier. At the same time, they bowed towards the soul emperor. How is it? How's the plan going? The Soul Emperor asked. A lanky businessman replied, we experienced some difficulty at the start. The nobility of the Heavenly Soul Empire discriminated against us. However, after you sent out instructions not to confiscate their land and wealth, they didn't dare to openly express their hate towards us even if they secretly hate us. They only resisted our efforts in the shadows. Over these few days, we've already demonstrated how magical soul tools can be, which I believe is slowly moving them. This is especially true for our thermal radiators, which I believe they are most interested in. Thermal radiators can greatly conserve costly coal. Every other week, we'll just need a soul engineer to pour in his soul power. That'll be sufficient to power a thermal radiator to keep a plot of land not bigger than 500 square meters warm. We can even avoid the smell of burning coal. They are all very surprised. The Soul Emperor nodded in satisfaction and responded, all right, continue to advertise. Give them everything. Don't feel heartache over that. The Marshal has mentioned that even though we'll experience some temporary monetary losses, they'll eventually be reliant on us once they adapt to a life of soul tools, and won't be willing to return to their obsolete lives. After we win over the nobility and convince them to work for us, we'll then turn our efforts to the citizens. In a few years, we'll win the hearts of the entire city. Yes. The businessmen nodded respectfully. After this, they carried out a series of reports. They were talking about how to transport soul tools into the city for the noble families and teaching them how to use them. They were also talking about how to move the nobility, as well as who were the ones who had been moved, and who were the ones who were still very stubborn. The entire report lasted roughly an hour before the businessman left. After sending them to the door, the mayor returned to his room and muttered in awe to himself, Marshal, you are far-sighted. This method is much better than performing a massacre. The Sun Moon Empire can't just rely on military power to rule the entire continent. This method to use soul tools to win the hearts of the people is indeed impressive. We've lessened the number of troops in the city, making them relax their guard. After that, we use soul tool technology to infiltrate their lives, although we're the ones who control the core technologies. In the future, they'll only be the Sun Moon Empire. The funny thing is that the Heavenly Soul Empire, Douluo Empire, and Douluo Empire are still trying to resist us. Perhaps they'll discover in a few years that their citizens in the territories we've occupied are no longer loyal to them. Haha, brilliant. This is indeed brilliant. The Marshal is indeed the person I admire the most. Conquering hearts without using force. That's the most advanced of all strategies. Huo Yuao stood outside for 2 hours and listened to everything. After listening to this point, his expression had already turned slightly pale. Impressive. This Marshal that he's talking about is too impressive. Using soul tool technology as a means of infiltration. What kind of brilliant idea is that? The air outside was extremely cold, but Huo Yuao was dripping with perspiration. An overt plot. It was a true overt plot. Perhaps he could destroy everything in Dragon City with all his strength. However, if the Sun Moon Empire did the same throughout the entire Heavenly Soul Empire, there was no way he could stop them unless he could drive them out quickly. Who exactly was this Marshal? He actually had such a strategy. He was indeed a brilliant strategist. Huo Yuao had seen Shu Tianran before. He didn't have a good impression of him. Without a doubt, Shu Tianran was an anti-hero. However, it was perhaps because of his disability that he seemed very sinister and vicious. Right now, the strategy that Huo Yuao heard of was definitely something that an anti-hero couldn't have thought up. This was a true overt plot. It was upright, but perhaps only effective in the long term. However, if it worked, it would be extremely effective. If they succeeded, the Heavenly Soul Empire would find it extremely challenging to regain hold of the territories they had lost. Given the current situation in all the empires, the foundation of every empire was the nobility. The nobility controlled almost all the resources in an empire. The most powerful of the nobility were naturally the imperial families of each empire. This was the foundation of a monarchy. This was why the Sun Moon Empire had a very specific target. First, they chose to penetrate the hearts of the nobility of the Heavenly Soul Empire. Once the nobility slowly sided with the Sun Moon Empire and helped them promote soul tool technology in their own empire, they could only be subjected to manipulation, given that they didn't possess any core technologies. They would forever be reliant on the Sun Moon Empire. The longer they were under occupation, the more evident this would become. This was too terrifying. The person who came up with this strategy left Huo Yuao in awe. There weren't any massacres. It was through pure soul tool technology penetration that the Sun Moon Empire demonstrated their advantage to the fullest. Before today, Huo Yuao would never have expected the Sun Moon Empire to use such a method of invasion. How should he react to such a strategy? Huo Yuao silently left the residence and found a hotel to stay the night. He was sleepless the entire night. It was only when the sky had already brightened that Huo Yuao retracted his thoughts. To him, it was fine that he couldn't sleep the entire night. It was just that he couldn't think of a proper way to deal with the Sun Moon Empire's strategy even though he had been thinking the entire night. What an overt plot. It was an overt plot that one found difficult to counteract. It wasn't completely foolproof. The simplest way of dealing with it was to quickly reclaim all the lost territories. At the same time, the Sun Moon Empire had to be stopped. It was only through this way that they could possibly hang on. However, what about the long term? Within the Sun Moon Empire's borders, the Empire had already promoted soul tool technology to ordinary citizens. Furthermore, it was extremely difficult to reclaim the cities that they had taken from the Heavenly Soul Empire. In the area of soul tools, the Sun Moon Empire was simply leading by too much. As time passed, the cities that had fallen to the Sun Moon Empire would likely yield to the Sun Moon Empire even if they didn't attack, and only maintain the current situation. With more resources and support, the Sun Moon Empire's soul tool technology would advance faster and faster. This would further the gap between them and the other empires of the original Douluo continent. The current peak of soul tool technology right now was the Death God. However, the Death God was undoubtedly an exception. It was a soul tool that everyone feared. It could only be operated after killing people. One Death God wasn't considered too terrifying to Huo Yuao. Its threat would cease to exist once the soldiers of the Sun Moon Empire couldn't handle it anymore. However, soul tool technology was continuously improving. As it continued to develop, there would be a day in the future where it could possibly threaten tidal Douluo, and even ultimate Douluo. If that was the case, the Sun Moon Empire's rule over the entire continent was bound to happen. Huo Yuao didn't reject soul tool technology. He was also a soul engineer. As soul tool technology kept on developing, it represented societal progress. It was an evolution of the entire Douluo continent. However, he didn't wish to see the Sun Moon Empire ruling over the entire Douluo continent. This was something that he couldn't accept. However, there wasn't any stopping them. Over the past few thousand years, the 3 empires of the original Douluo continent had already told him the answer using the current situation that they were facing, closing their empire and refusing to accept development as a reality, as well as unwilling to learn the qualities of others. The end result was that they were on the verge of becoming obsolete. The 3 empires of the original Douluo continent were too huge. All the authority lay in the hands of the nobility. Even if the imperial families wanted to promote soul tool development, it wasn't something that was effective in the short term. Most noble families were still discriminative towards soul tools. Perhaps the only hope lay in the academy. Shrek was only a city. It was mainly led by Shrek Academy. Over the past 10 years, ever since Elder Mu had recognized the importance of developing soul tools, and after Elderson had taken the reins, Shrek Academy had been continuously developing its soul tool department, and the Tang Sect was established to to encourage the speedy development of Shrek City. Furthermore, there weren't any noble families in Shrek City. Perhaps the future Shrek was the only hope left for the original Douluo continent. After thinking until here, who are you seemed to have thought of something. There was something extra in his head. However, he couldn't tell what it was yet. Just as he was gradually clearing his thoughts, his spiritual sea moved slightly. Nan Kyo was awake. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.